Pfizer and Moderna have announced clinical trials to determine whether or not there are long-term myocarditis risks linked to the COVID vaccine. According to NBC News, the FDA has required studies assessing the impacts as part of the approval process for mRNA COVID vaccines. Moderna has already launched 2 trials. Pfizer is slated to begin in the next couple of months.
According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, hundreds of millions of COVID vaccines have been administered. There have been 1,000 reports of myocarditis or pericarditis in children under 18, mostly in young males. Now, most of the patients who developed these conditions have fully recovered. So far, research has only looked at how they're doing after several months, however. So obviously, this should be investigated. Probably should have been investigated before these things were mandated all over the place, including in many cases for younger people in school. They tried to mandate them, at least in some school municipalities, et cetera, and I think that's largely been walked back. Famously, Joe Biden declared a mandate for for thousands and thousands of workers. That got struck down. I'm very for vaccination. I don't think we should have waited to approve them until all this testing is done. People should be able to make choices about their right medical decisions based on the available evidence and what their doctors recommend for them, and it can be different for different groups of people. People in an older or more at-risk category, the risk of not getting the vaccine, it might just so substantially outweigh anything else. The COVID being such a threat, but for younger and healthier people, they absolutely deserve that choice, and they're certainly entitled to more information about how this affects people.
Well, I think that some of the controversy around this is less about whether or not it was right to instruct people to get vaccinated earlier on. I think that sometimes I understand. I think there's rightly some frustration about mandates, et cetera, that persisted after we had knowledge about the limited effects of the COVID vaccine against transmissibility and the continued, I think, shaming and blaming that goes on around vaccination and ivermectin and all of these kinds of things, even though it's not actually calculated to doing what the people thought it was going to do. But remember, earlier on, there was an evolution in our understanding of what was going on here. And I understand in the context of a crisis, wanting people to get vaccinated, especially since hospitals were filling up, medical health practitioners were really bogged down, et cetera. But my concern here, and I think the reason why so many people are paying attention to this story, is why is that these trials are not being started until 2 years into the pandemic? I understand, again, the exigency of wanting to focus on getting the vaccines out early on, but 2 years into it to just now be studying the possible effects, these negative effects on the heart, especially for young males, does seem to be a delay that has not been sufficiently explained.
Right, and other countries are not following the exact same, not all of them, in lockstep with as pro-vaccination, even for younger categories, as we have been. Some European countries have gone a different way. Eventually, they've looked at the data and said, you know what? We're not seeing much of a benefit to this, where it's not meaningfully reducing cases. We're not actually seeing better health outcomes in lower age populations for another dose and another dose. So we're going to stop saying that's really absolutely what you should do. Maybe it's different if you have an underlying health condition or you have morbid obesity or something. But we're going to just ease off that a little bit. Yeah. Not saying that the risks of the vaccine are just so large, but just that we don't see much of a benefit. So why take any risk then if you're not getting much benefit? That's what other perfectly valid, perfectly well-informed health officials in other countries have determined. We obviously have some voices like that in this country saying things of that nature. It's not anti-vaccine. It's not about your grandparents, et cetera. They might always continue, or they might decide if they talk to a doctor, they might say, no, really, this year you should probably get another booster because COVID is really devastating, can be really devastating for this age group, and it's so much more dangerous than the risk you might develop myocarditis. Yeah, but that's just not necessarily the same for like a 22-year-old.
Sure, and I think another part of the story that is potentially affecting the timing of the research that's now underway is vaccine liability for pharmaceutical manufacturers and the like. I mean, I understand that on some level,
we talked about the scheduling, yeah.
Yeah, on some level, the interest and need to develop vaccines quickly and get them out to address a national emergency. I understand that these manufacturers want some protection against, against being sued if something goes awry when they are the ones that are being under pressure by the government to get these things out quickly. At the same time, again, 2 years into it, at what point does your being shielded from liability disincentivize you from following up on potential downstream effects of the drug that you're producing? Even in the best situations, pharmaceutical companies are not necessarily the most hypervigilant about finding out and disclosing the harms that they know exist with their own products. So I think this is a story that is going to continue to develop on both ends, both as we learn more about the potential downstream effects of vaccines, and also as we continue to learn more about the longer-term effects of long COVID.
Yeah, and you're right to bring up the liability, the scheduling. We've talked about these vaccines being added to the schedule, which does not mean they will be automatically mandated, but we know many municipalities, many states have just kind of rubber stamped what the CDC will say, well, we're just recommending this. Do whatever you want. They say, well, whatever you recommend is what we're requiring. And I could very much see a world where not in Florida, not in Texas, but in some places, these become mandatory even for fairly young children, as we're still kind of working through these issues. Seems like we should take that a little bit more under advisement, but we'll find out. All right, tomorrow on Rising, it's being reported that roughly 15,000 peaceful Iranian protesters have been sentenced to death for defying the government. We'll discuss this shocking information with an Iranian-American expert.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can catch us on Roku and other streaming apps as well.
Take care.
Bye-bye.